Pleasant good evening to all. And Mr. Williams, it's a pleasure to have you back. We hope that you had a very successful trip. And I also want to acknowledge the contribution of the Public Relations Officer in NEMO, Ms. Michelle Rodriguez, who has done an excellent job in the absence of Mr. Williams. So thank you, Michelle, for the work you have done in carrying the mantle forward for Mr. Williams' absence. I also want to take this opportunity today to acknowledge the Honorable Wendy Colleen Phipps, who celebrates her birthday today. So I ask the nation to join me in wishing her happy birthday today, and she has chosen to be here with us today. Thank you again, Minister Phipps, for being here, and also for your dedicated commitment to service to St. Kitts and Nevis and its people. I want to highlight a number of recommendations, bring to your attention a number of recommendations that we have placed before the Cabinet for consideration, and it's important that you, the general public, begin to familiarize yourself with some of these recommendations, as well as prepare mentally for us to move forward in the context of COVID-19. You would have listened to the presentations made by Dr. Wilkinson, Dr. Laws, as well as Superintendent Henry. And it's time for us to move forward. And we have to do so in a very proactive as well as safe manner. So you would have listened to the Prime Minister yesterday in his Leadership Matters program, made reference to the land and go. And what do we mean by the land and go entry process? So the recommendations that are there is for persons who are fully vaccinated and present a negative RT-PCR test within 72 hours of landing in St. Kitts and Nevis to be able to land in the Federation, be processed to the border agencies, including Port Health, Immigration, and Customs, and then they will be able to integrate into society right away, meaning you can take a taxi of your choice and go to your home or a place of residence. You can go into your vehicle, go to your personal vehicle, drive away and go home, or you can have a fully vaccinated member, friend, or family come to the airport and pick you up and take you home. So that is one of the recommendations that I am hopeful will receive favorable approval and consideration in the Cabinet. So once that has happened, we will notify you, the general public, and it will be implemented and updated in our health and entry protocols into St. Kitts and Nevis. We are hopeful that we will have this implemented in a very short time. This also means that the corridor of containment, however, will be maintained for the unvaccinated. So if you have not vaccinated and you're entering the Federation as a resident citizen, meaning that you are a citizen of this country, or you are a resident by being a holder of annual residency, residency by marriage, a work permit, or student visa, then you will have to quarantine for 10 days, 10 or 9 days thereabout. That's part of the recommendation. So the unvaccinated will now quarantine for a period of 9-10 days thereabout. I don't remember the exact number. So that too is a significant move as we attempt to bring a balance between health and economic activities for the country. In terms of the corridor of containment, I want to continue in this vein. We will also see some changes in this area. What do I mean by that? For now, we have residents or persons who are residing in Nevis. They go to the Reggae Beach to take the ferry over to Nevis and then be transported to the place of quarantine. Now, once this measures, the land and go, is accepted and implemented, it therefore means that persons who reside in Nevis and have to travel to Nevis via public transportation on sea can now utilize the ferry terminal services to be able to ferry over to Nevis. So these are some of the changes that you are going to see going forward once our recommendation is adopted and implemented. We have also received a lot of questions about the fencing, and the fencing has brought a lot of controversy and a lot of debate. However, we have taken gradual processes in safeguarding you, the citizens and residents of this country. We started with the physical barrier, and we are now going to move into the vaccine barrier, meaning that the fence at some point is going to come down in the near future, and then we are going to rely on the vaccination barrier to be able to provide us that protection. So yes, citizens and residents of St. Kitts and Nevis, the barrier that was placed, physical barrier of the fencing, was not a permanent measure that was implemented. It was a temporary measure until we reach the necessary threshold to move to the next phase of removing the physical barriers and then being dependent upon the vaccination barrier. What does that mean? There's an 80% threshold that was set. Once we reach that 80% threshold of fully vaccinated, vaccinated persons in St. Kitts and Nevis, then it means that we have to implement some measures to ease the restrictions. So that is where we are at right now. So besides the entry protocols and the tourism-based activities, we also considered and had discussion on the entertainment sector. In this regard, as Superintendent Henry would have stated, the measures that are before the Cabinet for the Cabinet's approval are going to facilitate entertainment activities. So we are hopeful that this can resume. Some of us on the task force, they are humans, and they too are desirous of entertainment. I won't call no name. I have one present, but I won't call no name. So we are all desirous. We are humans. So the entertainment sector has been given great consideration for resumption. I want to highlight something because I have been called by several journalists for the past 2 days regarding some concerns about the functions of the task force and the constitution of the task force, meaning the persons that make up the task force. And I just want to reference number 16 of 2010-20, which is the COVID-19 Prevention and Control Act of 2020. In this act, Section 6 speaks to the persons that make up the task force as well as the roles and function of the task force. And in Schedule 1, it speaks to the task force shall comprise of the following members: the National Disaster Coordinator, who shall be the chairperson, the Chief Medical Officer as the co-chairperson, the Medical Officer of Health and Nevis, Medical Chief of Staff, Senior Representative from the Nevis Disaster Management Department, Senior Representative from the Ministry of Health, Senior Representative from the Ministry of National Security, Senior Representative from the Royal St. Christopher Nevis Police Force, a Senior Representative of the St. Kitts and Nevis Defense Force, Senior Representative of the Immigration Department, Senior Representative of the Customs and Excise Department, Senior Representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and a Senior Representative from the Department of Information and Technology, a Senior Representative of the St. Kitts and Nevis Port Authority, a Senior Representative of the Nevis Air and Seaport Authority, and it also gives us the powers to be able to co-opt any other agencies and as necessary, whether it be private or public agencies, meaning government agencies. So what are some of the responsibilities of the National COVID-19 Task Force? So it says subject to the provision of the Section 3, the National COVID-19 Task Force is responsible for the coordination of the national response to COVID-19. The composition of the National COVID-19 Task Force is set out in Schedule 1, and the task force may liaise and consult with such other public and private agencies as bodies as may be necessary. 3A, it says the powers of the task force. A, to implement, pursuant to Section 3, national initiatives as it pertains to the prevention, mitigation, and suppression of the spread of COVID-19. B, to inspect the various facilities, including schools, hotels, guest house, places of business, places of quarantine, places of isolation, and other relevant locations or facilities for the purpose of ensuring the conformity with the provision of this Act and any relevant laws pertaining to the prevention, mitigation, and control of the spread of COVID-19. C, to liaise and consult with the relevant public or private agencies as may be necessary. D, to consult programs of public information and education and the mitigation of, preparedness for, and response to and recovery from COVID-19. E, to identify compliance team to assist in its operations. F, to guide the public on the implementations of measures to combat the spread of COVID-19. And Section 4 speaks to the compliance team and what the compliance team may do. So what happens when we have stakeholders engagement? So based on the request being made to the National COVID-19 Task Force, we have institutions, companies, organizations, whether it be private, public, or otherwise, that will request engagement. The task force meets every Tuesday afternoon from 2 p.m. Sometimes we go until 9, 10 o'clock in the night if necessary. And we discuss matters. And these matters that are discussed and they are voted upon based on a collective approach, meaning that what the majority agrees with is what is adopted. Then these recommendations are then submitted to the Mitigation Council chairs, the Honorable Attorney General, as well as the Honorable Wendy Phipps, who will then package this information based on what is submitted to them and make a cabinet submission. Then the National COVID-19 Task Force executive team, executive team will go to cabinet to present on these submissions and give guidance and advice on the submission made. After that is done, Cabinet deliberates on the submission and makes the final decision. The final decision is made by the Federal Cabinet of Ministers. Once the Federal Cabinet of Ministers approve any form of recommendation, whether it's altered to fit a particular narrative or accepted as it is, then it comes back to the task force for implementation. Bear this in mind that on the task force, you have persons like the Commissioner of Police, the Commander of the Defense Force, the Chief Medical Officer, who by nature of their own role and responsibilities in that position have powers according to their acts that governs them. So therefore, they too have some powers that they can implement without having to go through the task force mechanism. However, because they are part of the task force, the approach is taken collaboratively. This is important, is an important narrative for us to understand. So it's not that it's a CMO, Abdias Samuel, Dr. Cameron Wilkinson position. The position is taken on the majority. You have about 22 to 25 members that sits every Tuesday under the supervision of the Attorney General and Minister Phipps to discuss and deliberate on these matters before the recommendations are taken to the Federal Cabinet for final approval and then implementation by the COVID-19 Task Force and the relevant agencies. It's very important to note that. I'm understanding that there's some challenge regarding Carnival, just to be straightforward with you. To the journalists who would have asked the questions, Carnival Executive Committee would have been facilitated on several occasions to make the proposal regarding the safe hosting of Carnival. Based on the minutes of the meetings which I reviewed lately, all the recommendations and the proposals set by the Executive Committee of the Cabinet of the Carnival Committee were accepted by the task force. As a matter of fact, the task force didn't have to make much contribution. Based on the minutes, you would have seen how comprehensive the presentation would have been, and as such, there was little or any contribution that we had to make before we just sent the recommendations up to the cabinet, where the cabinet would have taken the position as to how the carnival would take place in St. Kitts and Nevis for 2021 into 2022. After cabinet would have approved, a meeting was convened to inform the carnival committee of the decision of the federal cabinet based on the recommendations made. This was then received and well accepted by the carnival committee, who then stated that they will continue, they will go ahead and make the necessary press releases and informed everyone. So there was a collective agreement and understanding by all parties, whether it be sports, carnival, or anybody else, as to how you're going to move forward after the cabinet would have given the necessary approvals to proceed. So it is important for you to understand the process of approval. And the process of approval is consistent with the minutes of each meeting and the recordings of each meetings that we have reviewed for the past few weeks. So I wanted to bring that to the attention of those journalists who have been calling about sports, carnival, and entertainment, and the task force impeding the progress of these sectors. There is no impediment. There is a balance of economic activity and the safety of the country, and based on the cabinet's decisions, we then implement as necessary. So I hope that this could answer some of the questions and concerns that were raised by a number of journalists, and we are open to any further engagement by the journalists so that we can bring clarity to some of the concerns raised, not only by the journalists, because they speak, but also by the citizens, because they speak for the citizens and residents of this country at times. So, Mr. Williams, that is my presentation for today. Again, I'm advising the general public, citizens, residents, of the recommendations that are before the cabinet. Once these have favorable approval, then these are going to be implemented. Like everything else, we have seen that when new implementations come on board, there are concerns. While we are asking, give these recommendations, once they are approved, the opportunity to work, and if they don't work, then we will adjust and make the necessary improvements so that we can have an effective and efficient system going forward. Thank you very much, Mr. Williams.